Hello, good evening everyone. I feel lucky that my story can be shared with all of you. It is very important for me to share it because I can tell you that my life has changed completely after what happened. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Marco Hinojosa. When I was younger, to be precise at 26 years old, I worked as a garbage collector in Mexico City. Before that, I worked as a cook's assistant, but I had some problems at that job and was fired. That was the first job I found to survive while I looked for better employment, as I already had a wife and a home to support, and my first child was on the way. I had been in that job for a while. I had a coworker who came on the back of the truck with me and would get off just like me to pick up the trash from the containers. But one night, while carrying out my duties, everything changed. It was late at night, there was nobody on the streets, and the night was quite calm. We entered a block where there were only apartment buildings, which usually took us longer because of the containers. I saw a medium-sized black plastic bag, but when I picked it up, it tipped over and several 500 Mexican peso bills fell out. I couldn't believe it. I picked up the bills that fell from the bag and then opened it. Yes, the entire bag was full of bills. Without thinking twice, I took the bag and separated it from the rest. I put it in a little corner of the truck on my side and didn't mention anything to my coworker. That night I arrived home very happy, straight to tell my wife what I had found, almost crying because I knew our lives would change. That night, we counted the money, and it was a little more than 400,000 pesos, approximately 20,000 US dollars. For us, that was a lot of money that we had never had in our lives, and it felt like a miracle because we had many expenses coming with the baby on the way. Neither of us slept that night from the excitement. So much so, we didn't even question where that money came from or why it was in that trash container. We hardly wondered if it was clean money. We didn't care about anything at that moment, just enjoyed it. I wanted to quit my job that same week and start a small food business by renting a place, as we now had the money to do so. And my wife has always been very good at cooking Mexican food. But my wife suggested I keep working as a garbage collector for a bit longer to not arouse suspicion, and I listened to her. I continued in that job. The next day I went to work as if nothing had happened. But when I came home at night, I found my wife horrified. She was sitting outside the house waiting for me, and when I arrived, she ran to tell me that very strange things had been happening all day, and she was afraid to go inside. I tried to calm her down and told her to tell me everything, as I was starting to get scared too. She began by saying that from the morning after I left for work, while she was still lying in bed, she heard someone walking down the hallway and thought it was me. So, she yelled out, asking if I had forgotten something, but nobody replied. Alarmed, she got up from bed to look. Not seeing anyone in the hallway, she went to the living room and kitchen where she also saw nobody. The door was locked as I had left it, so she didn't know what she had heard. She went back to the bedroom and tried to sleep a bit more but kept hearing noises, this time in the kitchen as if someone had moved the dishes in the sink. Again, she ran to the kitchen, but of course, there was nobody there. After that, she didn't go back to bed. She took a shower to start her day as she had plans to visit her mother and stay there until the afternoon. That's what she did. But when she returned to the house around 6:30 p.m., already dark, she says that upon entering and turning on the living room light, she saw a shadow walking down the hallway towards our bedroom. She was paralyzed for a moment and then decided to check. But again, there was nobody around the very small one-story house with 2 bedrooms. One for us and the other intended for the baby's room. She decided to wait outside for me because she was very scared to be inside. She felt a very strange sensation, as if someone else was there, a very heavy presence. The atmosphere inside gave her chills. She also told me that, while outside, she saw a strange shadow moving behind our bedroom window curtain. When she told me all this, the first thing I thought was that someone had broken in. I didn't know how, since all the windows had bars and the main door was always double locked, but that was my first thought. So I told my wife to wait outside, grabbed a large stone from the yard, and entered the house. All the lights were on because my wife had turned them on. I searched every corner, under our bed, in the closet, and in the bathroom. I swear, every corner, but there was nobody inside. I told my wife it was safe to come inside, that there was nobody there. But instead of calming down, she got worse because then it meant something paranormal was happening. I didn't believe in such things, it wasn't even an option for me. So, I thought maybe she was just nervous because of the pregnancy. I don't know. I thought of 1,000 things except for that. But she was very scared, and I remember struggling to make her come back inside the house. That night, in the early hours while we were sleeping, everything was completely silent and dark when suddenly, a whistling sound started in the living room. I woke up immediately, and my wife was still asleep. I carefully left the bedroom and slowly walked to the living room with a baseball bat I kept in the room. But when I got there, the whistling stopped. I immediately turned on the light, but there was absolutely nobody there. Then, I heard my wife scream as loudly and heartbreakingly as I've ever heard her scream in my life. I ran back to the bedroom and she jumped out of bed, hugging me. She could barely speak. She told me someone had caressed her hair, and she thought it was me. But when she opened her eyes, she saw what appeared to be a terrifying old woman standing beside the bed. That's when she screamed and covered her face with the blankets. When I entered and turned on the light, it had simply disappeared. That night, we went to her mother's house to sleep. We thought the problem was with that house we lived in, but we were wrong because the strange events continued even at her mother's house. My mother-in-law experienced something she had never encountered before. She said that the first day we were there, while I was working and my wife was taking a nap, she was washing dishes when she felt someone walk behind her, feeling the breeze of someone passing by quickly. She thought it was my wife who had gotten up, but when she turned around, she saw nobody. She felt so scared that she went to the room where my wife was sleeping to not feel alone. A week passed during which all sorts of strange and very frightening things continued to happen at my mother-in-law's house. We didn't know what to do. We went to church to confess, and we also had the house blessed, but everything remained the same. Then one afternoon while I was working, I passed by the same place where I had found the money. I was emptying the same trash container when suddenly, a man approached me. He looked to be about 40 years old and said he had seen from his window that I had taken the bag of money that day. He wanted to warn me that the money was cursed because he had made some sort of satanic pact to obtain it, but his life had been almost completely ruined because of it. That's why he decided to throw it away but never thought someone else would pick it up. He didn't count on the bag breaking and revealing its contents. The man looked very bad, haggard, with red and tired eyes as if he hadn't slept for days. He didn't wait for me to respond, just said he wanted to warn me to get rid of that money, and then left. My coworkers yelled at me to hurry up and stop chatting because we had to continue, but I was almost immobilized when I heard what that man said. That same night, upon arriving at my mother-in-law's house without saying anything to my wife, I went straight for the money we still had in that black bag. I took it to the backyard, to a garbage can, and set it on fire. Indeed, the strange events stopped happening. We returned to our difficult financial situation, but I swear we felt more peace than we had ever felt before. And since then, I've never again picked up absolutely anything from the trash. Not even objects that looked in good condition, nothing. Hello, my name is Fede, and I have a macabre experience I want to share with all of you. It happened to me while I was working as a garbage collector in my city. Here is my story. We would follow a set route, always through the same neighborhoods, and we got to know the houses since it was always the same route. However, there was one house in particular that almost always had trash that smelled really bad, but not like normal trash. It smelled like something rotting, an almost unbearable odor. Of course, we never opened the bags from any house, especially not from that particular house, as the smell was barely tolerable whenever it was being emptied. We jokingly referred to it as the rotten house, my colleagues and I. but we had no idea about the dark secret it hid. One afternoon we passed by again, and it smelled terrible as usual. I don't know how the neighbors passing by had not filed a complaint, as even without getting too close, the trash can already emitted a very strong odor. That day, a colleague decided to rummage through the bags to see what smelled so bad. He did it alone, as neither my other colleague nor I wanted to get close. What he found was a completely dismembered, horrifying sight. Shocked by such a grotesque scene, we stepped away from the bag. My colleague had to lift the poor animal and throw it into the truck. We couldn't do anything else. As we continued on our route, we wondered who could have committed such an act against a defenseless animal, theorizing that it was the owner or owners of that house who had done it. And for obvious reasons, we assumed it wasn't the first time, as their trash can always smelled that bad. 3 days passed and we went by that house again, where we found another cat in the same condition. But this time, we noticed that the animal had something inside its stomach that looked like a rolled-up letter tied with a red ribbon. We didn't want to touch it, as it was covered in blood and other things since it had been inside the cat's stomach. But we quickly realized it was related to witchcraft. The same colleague who dared to open the bag to discover what was emitting the odor was a huge animal lover. So, he became furious upon realizing that cats were being used for these practices, and we couldn't stop him. He went straight to that house and knocked on the door in a very agitated manner, determined to confront whoever lived there, regardless of the risk of losing his job. After a while, a very unfriendly and dirty man appeared, who looked to be over 60 years old. Although we couldn't hear what they were saying, we noticed his annoyed expression towards my colleague. Then, he turned to look at us with such horrible, evil-filled eyes before slamming the door in my colleague's face. My colleague returned to us, very angry, saying he had warned that man to stop committing those atrocities against animals and that he would report him. The man simply stared at him with a cold look, and before closing the door in his face, told him, "You're going to regret this." My colleague didn't take his comments seriously, overwhelmed by his anger towards that man, and determined to report him. As we continued collecting trash from that block, a lady living 3 houses down from that man came out to warn us not to mess with him. She said he was a very evil-hearted witch who had harmed many people, and that's why nobody interfered with him, which explained why no complaints were made about the foul smells coming from his house. We thanked the lady for the warning, but my colleague ignored it and still filed the complaint, although no investigation ever took place. 2 weeks later, we learned that my colleague, who had been the only one brave enough to confront that man about his actions, had a car accident and lost his life. We don't know if that was his destiny or if the man had something to do with it, but it felt like too much of a coincidence, and I was filled with a terror I had never felt before, along with anger towards that man. We couldn't do anything, as how do you accuse someone without evidence? Moreover, my colleagues were very scared. They didn't want trouble with that man. So when we passed by his house, we collected the trash as quickly as possible, enduring the smell and without looking at his house. Later on, I found a better job and never found out what happened to that man or passed by there again. Good evening, community. I hope you're all doing very well. I want to share my experience anonymously because I just need to get it off my chest and try to forget it for my mental health. I'm a 40-year-old man who now has a good job and is at a good point in my life. But when I was 32, I fell into despair, and my life was in shambles. I had a house and a partner who, despite everything, always supported me. It was because of her that I decided to rehabilitate myself. It was a long process, but I managed to get through it. However, nobody wanted to hire me because of my background, so we lived very humbly, just on what my partner earned at her job, while I spent my time looking for employment and scouring the dumpsters in the wealthier areas of my city to see if I could find valuable things to sell. Often, wealthy people would throw away items that were still in good condition, and my wife and I would sell them outside our house. One of those times, while I was rummaging through those dumpsters, I found a nearly new wheelchair. The wheels worked perfectly, and it was fully functional. I couldn't understand why it had been thrown away. I thought maybe the sick person didn't need it anymore and it was just taking up space, so they decided to get rid of it. Without a second thought, I took it home, thrilled to sell it at our garage sale that weekend, because I knew we could make good money from it. It was Thursday night when I arrived home with the wheelchair and some picture frames in good condition that I had found. I left the wheelchair in the living room with the other items we had gathered to sell and went to sleep since my partner worked in a factory and had to get up at 4 in the morning every day. At 4 a.m., she got up and went to take a shower to go to work. Meanwhile, I continued to doze since I always said goodbye to her when she left, so I didn't want to fall into a deep sleep. Then, I heard her shout from outside the room that she was leaving, which was strange because she always came into the room to change and kiss me goodbye. But I thought she had taken her clothes with her and was just in a hurry, so I shouted back wishing her well and saying we'd see each other in the afternoon. After that, I heard nothing else. A few minutes later, my partner entered the room, still wrapped in a towel because she was just about to get dressed. And she entered somewhat confused, asking me if I'd moved the wheelchair to just outside the room and for what reason. I swear I jumped out of bed in shock because she wasn't even ready to leave, and I had clearly heard her say goodbye. I asked her why she had said goodbye if she wasn't even ready yet, and with a look of surprise, she asked me what I was talking about. She said she hadn't said anything to me, and that she had been in the shower the whole time. She suggested I might have dreamed it and then asked again about the wheelchair, to which I replied I had no idea what she was talking about. I hadn't gotten out of bed at all. She looked at me, frightened, and whispered, "The wheelchair is here outside the room. How did it get here?" I went out of the room and indeed there was the wheelchair, almost against our bedroom door. I was already very scared by what had happened before, with someone speaking to me in my wife's voice. I took the wheelchair and brought it back to the living room. My wife quickly got dressed and had to leave because it was very late, and we didn't have time to discuss what had just happened. I was left alone in the house. It was still early morning, dark and quiet. I was a bit scared but tried to go back to sleep because I wanted to go out at 8 in the morning when businesses opened to look for work again. But as I tried to sleep, I heard a squeaking sound, like wheels getting closer and closer until they bumped into my bedroom door, hitting it. I immediately jumped out of bed, unable to explain the horrible fear I felt, my legs shaking. I turned on the light but didn't want to go out. I didn't want to open the door. I was very afraid. Suddenly, I heard the wheelchair bump against my bedroom door again, as if someone was moving it back and forth to hit my door. It was extremely disturbing. I stood beside my bed just looking at the door, completely paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. But the worst part was when I heard my partner's voice saying, "Open the door, honey." The fear was so great that I decided to escape through the window to the street in my pajamas and barefoot. I ran until I reached the sidewalk, where I called my wife from my phone, asking if she was okay because I was very scared something might have happened to her for some reason. She responded, alarmed, asking what was wrong, explaining that she was fine and had just arrived at the factory, and she had to hang up quickly, or else she'd get in trouble for being late. I didn't want to scare her further, so I told her I just wanted to make sure she had arrived safely, and then hung up. I waited outside until dawn. That's when I gathered the courage to go back inside the house, now with the daylight and people passing by in the street creating a much safer and less terrifying environment, in my opinion. I opened the door to my room and there was the wheelchair facing my door. The first thing I did was take it out of my house, and it felt like lifting a huge weight off my shoulders. Everything went back to normal and we never experienced anything like that again. I can't tell you what was with that wheelchair, who its owner was, or what its history might have been because, honestly, I have no idea. But what I do know is that there was something evil in it, because there had to be a reason it was disposed of. Maybe its owner was a very bad person involved in dark practices. I don't know. But since that day, My partner has forbidden me from picking up more objects from the trash, and I have never done it again. Thank you all for listening to these stories. I hope you enjoyed them. See you in the next video. Good night.